What leadership lessons can you expect from a former Navy SEAL? Well, not what you'd expect. Our guest, Diego Ugalde, learned many leadership lessons as a SEAL, and many more afterward. The key, he says in this episode, is looking inside and knowing yourself, your real self. He shares his tips on how to do that in this episode. Expect the unexpected from all of us at the Innovative Leadership Institute, too. Our leadership development framework constantly updates to incorporate the latest research and real-world experience. Learn more about our offerings at innovativeleadership.com. After listening to Diego, of course.
This is Innovating Leadership, Co-Creating Our Future. I'm your host, Maureen Metcalf, founder and CEO of the Innovative Leadership Institute, where we help leaders be future ready. Helping us in this mission today is Diego Ugalde, a retired Navy SEAL, leadership expert, storyteller, and the author of Leading from the Deep. We'll be talking about how spiritual connection and emotional intelligence transform executive performance. Diego, we're glad you're with us.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me here. Appreciate it, Maureen.
What are some of the most significant lessons you learned as a SEAL, specifically about leadership and how to apply them?
One of the things that makes the SEAL teams as successful as they are is the culture. It is the expectation that not only are you performing, but you're performing on an elite level. That's the bare minimum. And because that culture exists, it is those type of people who even pursue to become part of the fraternity, so to speak. So if you show up to a SEAL team and you're not operating on an elite level, or you are not driven to develop and learn so that you are performing on an elite level, then there's something fundamentally wrong with you, and either it is corrected or you're expelled out of the community. It's a very interesting culture to be a part of, and one that from moment to moment, the assessments are going on. It doesn't matter what you did yesterday. And we all look at each other. Can I depend on you in my worst, most enormous moments? And we know that other people are looking at us like that because we're looking at each other like that as well. So the standard is always there. The truth of that is where else does that exist? Not very many other places. Then all of that mindset, all the things, how does that apply to every other organization in the world? I don't think it has to be on that level. There's a lot of people that we train, they're like, oh, like we're the Navy SEALs of Google, or we're the Navy SEALs of Pharma or something like that. I'm like, God in heaven, please don't do that. Because you'll be in the middle of lawsuits in 2 seconds. Your building's going to burn down next week or whatever it is. But the whole idea is you don't have to have the SEAL culture. What you could choose to have is like that deep of an alignment for whatever culture it is that you are trying to create, or that as leadership, what you think is, if everybody gets behind this and is on board with this type of thing, then we're going to succeed. So it doesn't have to be a carbon copy, but the whole idea behind the SEAL teams, why it was so powerful, is that everybody was in line with it. That was the standard. No matter what the standard is, everybody is in line, then you're doing well. That is one of the things that I learned from a leadership standpoint from the SEAL teams.
You mentioned the alignment and everybody's looking at you. As leaders, we often forget that everyone is looking at our smallest moves to decipher what's going on. I show up with a headache and somebody thinks something's wrong with the company. How do I show up really matters for leaders.
Yeah, it's funny. There are leaders who are hyper aware and afraid of what other people might be thinking from everything that they're doing. Everyone is different. Everyone is in a different place or on a different path. And that includes all the other people in the organization. So there's just, the possibilities are endless. Just because we were doing that in the SEAL teams, for example, doesn't mean that's the highest level state of being constantly aware and concerned with what other people are thinking. That is actually quite a dysfunctional way of being. Number one, because you don't know where people are. You don't know what they could possibly thinking, and all the billions and billions of scenarios that could potentially be created and manifested in their mind. And so to be slave to that, or to be overly concerned, it's one thing to notice. It's another thing to alter your state of being because of what you're afraid somebody else might be thinking. When you start to get into the whole idea of trust, which is another huge component of the SEAL teams. How can you trust somebody when you know fundamentally they're not necessarily showing up as they are? They're not being genuine to themselves. You cannot be genuine to yourself if you're constantly abbreviating yourself or adjusting yourself in order to not ruffle any feathers or not disturb. And so the ones who are most concerned or afraid of how that could possibly be going, like they're all over the map. It's not because they're bad people at all. It's just because they don't know who they are. Because when somebody deeply knows who they are, and they don't have to move for anyone, and no one has to move for anyone else. And it's that kind of anchoring, that kind of stability that creates these environments of trust and stability itself, is when somebody is in that way, in their state of being. So for the leaders who are constantly worried about what other people are thinking, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what they're thinking, because people are thinking things all the time that they already know. It's not that they have to be disinterested in how other people are. That's not what I mean. That's what do I need to do today in order to allay their fears. It's hard. You'll never get anything done. So be aware of it for sure. You need to listen and connect with people, but still remain as you are if it's your highest state of being.
When we talk about leadership, we talk about being, relating, and doing. Being, for us at the Institute, being the foundation of leadership.
Whatever it is I'm about to say here in the next minute or two, it's just words. If people don't have a visceral connection, understanding, and experience of what it is to actually be connected with who they really are, it's just words. There's no podcast, there's no book, there's no nothing that can help teach somebody the experience of what it is. It doesn't exist. Funny being in this work, discovering how limiting language is, and also misleading, because I can ask a second grader, tell me with full confidence that they feel like they know what it is to be. And that definition is going to change for people as they grow and their life experience expands and all this. And if they never leave the space of the thinking mind or the egoic state, they'll never know. You can never know what it is to be, but they'll swear to God on their life that they know exactly what it is to be. So it's our languages. But for the people who actually bring it into their experience, the actual state of being, they're the ones who know. They can be in alignment with what that is. When they fall out of alignment with who they are to their core, mistakes are coming. It's just the way it is. When you know who you are, you know who you are. I don't mean to be so cryptic. I'm not trying to be. I'm also just trying to be honest. If somebody asked me 10 years ago who I am, I'll say, oh, I'm a Navy SEAL, I'm a dad, I think I'm like the world's best hugger, I'm a medic, all these things. That's what I would have said of who I am. Years later, I'm like way deeper than that. And then you get to the level where you're just like, I am. And that's it. Somebody would have told me that 10 years ago, I would have been like, doesn't make any sense to me. What do you mean you are what? And so there's a huge disconnect between common cultural understanding of what that is in deep truth.
Let's unpack that a little bit. I probably went through 5 workbooks on find your purpose and spent time out in the woods hiking and time alone. What was that journey like for you, and what your story is to get from where you were 10 years ago?
Yeah, so the only way that I am aware of to experience these things is to go to what some people call elevated state of consciousness, where you go beyond the thinking mind. You actually are in a state of observing. You're observing your thoughts, you're observing your mind, you're observing even your body as though it's like on a movie screen. And there are many ways to get to these elevated states of consciousness. And one of them, the most powerful and the deepest possible way of attaining this, is through meditation. Some people get there through psychedelic experiences, vision quests, holotropic breathing. So you breathe a certain way for 20 or 30 minutes. You lose the sense of self.
4 hours.
Not the number 4, but for multiple hours. You know, and there's other people like Eckhart Tolle, like he found it just in massive amounts of suffering. And then finally, like everything broke and he was just left with all that was just left around. He was like, oh, wait a minute. So he found it that way. So there are many ways to find this. If all of this is done from the place of trying to figure it out, still is the mind controlling and creating illusion and all this stuff. I talk about this all the time. It was such a great quote from Einstein. So like, you can't solve the problem with using the same line of thinking that you used to create the problem in the first place. And what I am saying is the mind is the one that is actually in the way of experiencing this. So if the mind is being used to figure this out, it cannot be done. It literally cannot be done. So the way I found it, of the multiple ways that there are to find it, I found it through psychedelics. There are many different medicine within the plant medicine space. And the first medicine I had ever done was 5-MeO-DMT, or bufo, which is like Sonoran desert toad that has these poisonous sacs, and they extract the poison and they crystallize it, and then you smoke it. And the interesting thing about it is we have this component within us that is released twice in our life, once when we're born and once when we die. And so you have an opportunity when you sit with this medicine to experience what it is to come in and to come out of this world all at the same time. And when I sat with it, I was in the healing space with the other Navy SEALs around who were going through their own retreat. I was invited to come observe, and they said, "Hey, we got an extra dose of this. Do you want to try it?" I'm like, "Dude, I'm not in the military anymore. I'm not going to get, I'm not going to get in trouble. Hey, you'll just do it. What do I care?" It was so hilarious because I had no clue what I was about to experience. What one can experience through 5-MeO is like an immediate snapping out of the mind space. I didn't do anything. I didn't control this. I didn't make it happen. I was just sitting there, and in an instant, I was pulled out into this, what we're calling elevated state of consciousness. Everything I thought about who I am, even the world around me, was completely surface level, shallow awareness. Everything, even like my deepest thoughts, I thought. And the only way that I know how to explain it, have you ever seen those videos of like you're somewhere in the United States and it zooms out and you see the Earth, and it zooms out in bigger planets, and you zoom out and you see the sun, and then you zoom out and bigger stars, and zoom out and see galaxies, and it just keeps on going. It's like, whoa, this place is massive. That's as expansive as we are inward. And the inside is that big also. Coming into real connection with all that is within us, it's a game changer. And then, of course, there's always like, you realize you were on drugs, right? And the only thing I can say is I've never known truth until I saw it through the lens of elevated states of consciousness. If anything is the trip, it's this life. But real being is way beyond what we're experiencing, way beyond. The last thing I'll say sometimes can be helpful is, as far as science can tell, there are up to 11 different dimensions or more. And we experience 3 of those. And these dimensions aren't like through wormholes or in other galaxies or other places in the universe. Like literally everything is happening here. We just can't see it because we're these 3-dimensional creatures. What that means is there are 8 different additional dimensions going on around us all the time. We just can't see them. And for example, there are scientists that believe that butterflies can't see how beautiful their wings are. They're just floating around just because of the positioning of their eyes in relation to where their wings are. We can see it, we're looking at it, but they don't know. When I think about it in those terms, for me, it's just so easy to be like, of course I can't see this because there's so much going on around that I'm not even capable of seeing. So it makes sense that there could be more.
For you, the journey didn't stop when the drug wore off. It's not like you just went back to work and said, that was an interesting trip. Like I went to Disney World this weekend.
Yeah.
And then you go to work on Monday morning.
Yeah.
That has to be disorienting.
If you ever had a compass where the needle was stuck and you shake it up and then it finally finds its way to magnetic north, like I think that's more of what it was. It was like a shaking up and maybe a reorienting. It cleaned things up. I was in full awareness that I had no idea what had just been cleaned up. There's so much that comes along with being in those elevated states. Like there's some knowing, there's all this stuff. But when you come back into normal waking life, you're still you. Something that's really common in this space of expansive growth is that your logical awareness shoots up. So I was logically aware that I was way more than I could ever imagine, but my state of being was still down here in time by integrating the lessons and bringing into the awareness and staying curious and like literally throwing the word knowing out into the garbage and just being, maybe there's more to learn, maybe there's more to understand, maybe this. My state of being slowly started to creep up with this whole idea of I am. And because learning isn't linear, like you don't start small and continue, there are absolutely times entirely outside of the medicine in a completely sober state where I can experience the whole idea of what it is to simply be. And then life happens and all of a sudden I'm heartbroken or I'm sad or I'm judgmental or whatever. I come to realize what that is and I start to elevate again. It's all good. No judgment. It just is. It's just part of it. The point is still learning. still growing. And maybe I still have no concept of what it actually is to be. But it's so easy to be in these places and go down this rabbit hole of, if this, then how come this, and all the stuff. Am I doing this right? All that. And the one metric that I use to cross-check on whether or not I'm on where I want to be is just, how do I feel about things as compared to how I used to feel about things? Disagreements or things in life happening the way they do as opposed to the way I want them to be, all of those things. If I'm just genuinely better off than I would have been in the old way of thinking, that tells me that I'm doing something that I prefer. And that's it. That's enough. But the key word is being genuinely. I'm not talking about faking it till you make it. I'm not talking about shoving it down for later. I mean, to the core. That is what tells me, maybe not necessarily that I'm doing something right, but that I am doing something that I genuinely prefer. And that's enough.
You mention emotions. Back to you're a Navy SEAL, you probably didn't sit around, I'm guessing, and talk about emotions a lot. Now you go through this experience, you now have a capacity to navigate emotions. And I want to bring this back to a leadership space, because as leaders, we have to have an emotional acumen.
Yeah. One of the things that I think a lot of people think early on in this path is that I shouldn't be angry anymore. I've learned a lot. I've healed enough. I've done all this stuff. I'm angry. Something is wrong. What they find when they stay on this path is that anger is a gift, just like happiness is. It's a tool and nothing more. There's such thing as toxic anger, and there's such thing as toxic happiness. I think there's all kinds of terms for it. Just like whatever, toxic positivity or something. I don't know, but it's the same thing. It's just being disingenuous to how you are in the moment. The thing about leadership is there's a reason why you get paid more money. There's a reason why you're in charge of people. And that is, when I am experiencing anger, how am I processing it? Am I dealing with it in an appropriate, productive way? Or am I letting it beat me, and therefore I am now punishing other people for whatever it is that I might be experiencing? So leaders who punish other people for their own personal experiences, it's obvious to say they're not operating on their elite level. But leaders who experience anger and recognize what that is, and that it doesn't have anything to do with anyone else. This is really hard. This is very difficult to understand. Whatever your experiences are, they're rooted within you. It's not the other person's problem. It's not the other person's fault. When you come to understand this stuff on a deeper level, as a leader, you can come to understand that whatever anybody does that angers you, there is something within their actions or their state of being that is reflecting to you parts of you that you haven't worked out yet. For people who are stuck in this mind world, that doesn't make sense. Wait a minute, they're the ones who are late every day. What the hell does that have to do with me? It's just always them. It's always that out there. But the people who do understand this is, I'm upset of my ability to lead, to not be able to show this person a way or whatever, to not be able to, really what it comes down to is control them so that I'm pissed off at you. You're not following in my world of personal control. That's another very difficult thing for leaders to wrap their head around. It's like there's very little in this world that you can control. It's like mostly really limited to what's going on inside. Being like a high vibrational being isn't about controlling the world around you. It is about receiving the world as it is in your best state and addressing things from moment to moment, from the clearest mind, from your most grounded, from this state of deeper knowing, whatever it is, whether somebody's late or somebody did something in the media that just smashed the company's branding, whatever it is. Like all the biggest stuff to all the smallest stuff. This is just as it is, and I'm going to respond in the best possible way because I'm grounded. And it comes back to control. So there are leaders who believe that as long as they do what they need to do, that people aren't going to make mistakes. They're not going to do the wrong thing.
That's not true.
It's not true. There's a lot of people in this space, not only leaders, but humans, that believe if they do everything right, then there are no mistakes. There is no sadness. There is no struggle. There is no anything. Literally everything is coastal, and they're just coasting. And that is not the purpose of life, to my awareness. The purpose of life is to fully experience everything as it is And you can experience it in any way you want. You can either become a drug addict, or you can become a missionary, or you can do whatever you want to do. And it's up to you how you experience this whole thing. You can either experience by arm wrestling against the universe. This isn't supposed to happen. This isn't supposed to happen. That doesn't last long. Your arm rips off. Or you're like, hey, this is what is happening now. How do we respond? Oh, let's go. And then with leadership on top of that, it's like, how can I help the person who is breaking in some way? This isn't limited to leadership, but it's very common in leadership. But they feel like they are literally interacting with somebody who is fully grounded, deeply rooted, worked through all their traumas, and is operating at 100%. And then when they operate outside of those realms, they're like, man, what the hell's wrong with you? It's everything, just like with you. Nobody is on this thing. And so when they understand that, they're like, oh, you're suffering. You're not at your best. How can I help? To me, that's what leadership is, because everybody has a living life outside of a job.
It takes us back to the idea of grounded. I, as the leader, am okay. I'm safe in the world, and I have the capacity to respond to the thing that's happening. I have the internal capacity and the external resources to move through this in a way that may be painful, but it won't kill my company.
Yes, these things don't have to break you.
But to get to that point is a significant process.
One of the reasons why it's so significant is it's completely counterintuitive to what I hear all the talking heads talking about what elite level performance is. It's dominate, smash the competition, you suck it up, just do it, all those things. These low-hanging fruit taglines of how you should be showing up in the world as an elite level leader. And by far, those catchy taglines are the things that literally prevent us from actually being our fullest. And one of those words is surrender. Another one of those words is soften. Be soft. And you're never going to hear that, especially from retired Type A Navy SEALs, whatever it is. To be soft is to be vulnerable. All of these negative things, as if it is negative to experience living. There's something wrong with my life experience because I'm sad. There's something wrong with my life experience because I'm weak. There's something wrong with my life experience because whatever it is. And so the control muscle kicks in and just being like, hey, fuck up, dude, let's go. And you're like denying what is. It's not that. It doesn't have to be that. There's a whole nother way. This is why what you're talking about, this movement, is so difficult, because we have to undo. I'm generalizing here, but in culture, like, we have to undo everything we've been taught. It isn't our job to arm wrestle the universe. Like, I've arm wrestled the universe plenty of times. I've run on broken legs. I've done all this stuff. To me, man, that stuff's for the birds. What if whatever happens in my existence, I focus more on reconciling and actually being in the state of being okay with whatever happens, and then choosing to do what I prefer to do based off of that, instead of judgment, shame, all the stuff. Like, for example, there's a very famous Chinese parable that, as far as the way it's been translated to me, is I'd rather be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war, as if that's something to aspire to. And what I can say is, 'cause I've coached over 400 veterans in their own processes of coming home from war and that kind of thing, is that is one of the foundational elements of suffering itself. It's like, I'm a warrior. No matter what, I'm a warrior. And what do warriors do? They prepare for battle, or they battle. And so what that means is they come home and they sit with their children as the warrior, and go to a restaurant and they sit in the restaurant as a warrior, just in case somebody breaks through these doors with an Uzi out. I got to know how I'm going to defeat and destroy them. Or they're sitting around the Christmas tree on Christmas morning while everybody's opening presents, and they're sitting there as the warrior. And they don't know what it is to simply be the gardener in the garden. The only thing that matters in that moment is planting the seed, or cultivating the soil, or removing the weeds, or whatever, and nothing else. They're in the garden planting seeds while they're looking over the horizon to see, like, where the enemy's potentially coming from. So they can't be here. In other words, they're living through this scenario as opposed to living.
You've just described my upbringing with a dad who was a Vietnam hero, and he still worries about placing the bathtub under the bedroom window so he can shoot at invaders if they come to his house. He's in his late 80s. Mm-hmm. That's still the life. That's still the mindset.
And it makes sense to me. because he's listening to very successful people, or on the surface, they look very successful. This is what you've got to do in order to succeed. This is what you got to do in order to be a man. This is what you got to do. And what I see are people who are so broken that they don't have the strength anymore even to lie to themselves. And when you break people open like that, all that's left is what actually is. I don't have to tell any one of them this isn't the way, because if at this point they know whatever I've done, whatever I've been doing, it's not the way. It's not helping me. It's not helping me to be the warrior at my son's soccer game. It's not helping me. I just got out of jail. So what's the problem? Okay. But for people who don't fully break, this is what they say. It makes sense. I am the protector of this house. I got to do this. The border is unprotected and people are piling in from God knows what country. Like, I got to be prepared. And this is the world that they live in. It's the world that they created for themselves. It's so simple, but it's so hard. But you create the reality that you have, and that's it. If you choose, that's not what you want anymore. You just choose something different. I think about what all of this could mean to leadership. In leadership, if you're in a perpetual state of fear, like everything is going to go wrong, everything's going to go wrong. And meanwhile, in between things actually going wrong, there's this huge blanket of darkness and clouds and fear and shame. And who the hell do I hold accountable for all this stuff? That's the thing. But when you are in a softened state and you do what you can, you do all the training, you do all the education, you do your best to hire people that are aligned with the culture and all this stuff. You allow them to be as they are, and you grow. And that's it. And mistakes happen, and that's it. Again, mistakes are happening anyway. What is your experience through those mistakes is the thing.
Diego, thank you for all you did as a Navy SEAL. Thank you for the work that you do with veterans. And thank you for the leadership coaching and training that you provide to organizational leaders across a range. Is there anything you want to share with our listeners?
Sure. One of the things that I hear almost to the person when we get involved in coaching or whatever is, okay, Diego, listen, I haven't been through what you've been through. I'm just a therapist, or I'm just an executive. As if somebody's suffering or life lessons or whatever are more important or relevant than anyone else's. And I've come to understand that they're not. It's all the same. Like, it matters just as much. My suffering might have different clothes on it, but in the core, in the root of it all, it's all the same. Whether it's experienced through combat, whether it's experienced through growing up as a child in a home, or through work or relationships or whatever, it's all the same. What I see is there's 4 deep common core elements that contribute to anybody's suffering. And one is being disconnected from the self, not actually understanding or connecting with who we really are. And number 2, not understanding the mind for what it is, and as importantly, what it is not. And number 3, not being present. And number 4, being disconnected from the whole experience of loving the self. It's funny because this illusion of a hierarchy of suffering exists. People don't give themselves permission to suffer. They don't give themselves permission to, like, listen, I'm not a Navy SEAL, so what could I possibly have to complain about? Like, that kind of thing. So deny. So one of the ways that we're bridging this whole idea of helping people to come to understand that literally whatever it is that they're going through matters just as much. We have the warrior side. And so we're a group of veterans that are just going around and telling our deepest, most vulnerable, transformative, visceral experiences just to tell these stories. And when people hear that Navy SEALs are worried about diapers, they're worried about impressing their dads, and they're like, oh crap, like, me too, man. Yeah, we're all, you matter entirely. You're the only thing that matters. It gives people permission to soften. It gives people permission to look inward and be like, well, maybe this whole thing that I've been thinking about isn't so. Maybe there's another way. And giving people permission to just consider that can help catalyze them onto a path where they're able to heal, because that's really what matters. We love doing that. It gives people a chance to access Navy SEALs, and they find out, oh, you're just like a dude. Yeah, you're just a dude. That's it. No big deal. It just creates connection and community and gives people permission to really get after some things so that they've been holding, like your 80-year-old dad. Man, what am I doing? This isn't helping me. There's another way. So yeah, it's a really cool project that we're working on. That's amazing.
Diego, last question. How would people learn about your work, about Warrior Side, about the range of your coaching?
Yeah, I'm also a psychedelic integration coach. There's just so much that happens in the psychedelic experience. They're like dreams. So it's like if you ever had a dream that you just didn't, man, what the heck was that pink elephant doing there? They can be confusing and they can be really strong and it can be unsettling. So having a psychedelic integration coach not tell you what this was, but help you find out from the knowing that you have from within really helps you maximize the potential of that experience. So on social media, my biggest presence is on LinkedIn, Diego Ugalde, and coaching company, thetridentapproach.com, thetridentapproach.com. And then we're also on the warriorside.com for the storytelling. We just had a show in San Diego, like our soft opening, which was really great. Our huge massive opening to the world is going to be at the House of Blues in San Diego on March 29th, 2025. It's going to be like the limousines and the white lights in the sky and all that kind of huge thing. And so we're really excited about that. And we are also on Instagram under the Trident Approach and also Warrior Sides. Happy to connect with people who are like, I've experienced everything, I've gotten everything, I've earned everything, I've done everything, and everything is still empty. If that's you, let's talk, because there's all kinds of stuff we can get into.
Thank you. I really appreciate the conversation. This idea of finding the deeper connection is a game changer for leaders.